I really have a mindset of we never know when it's going to be our time. And I know that I'll be in their shoes one day. So every single day I'm thinking, how am I going to make myself proud whenever I'm in those shoes? Like when I'm looking back on this day, however many years later, hopefully many years, am I going to say that I was doing my best? Was I treating others well? Was I putting good into the world? Were people leaving conversations happier than when they came into them? And that's what's really important to me. That's part of the reason for the title, The In-Between. The main reason is that I am with patients in the in-between this world and whatever comes next, whenever I'm with them at the end. But a big reason for it is that when I was raised, I had this very black and white thinking of there's either a God in religion or there's nothing. Nothing happens. And the in-between symbolizes where I sit now. Personally, for me, I just feel like something happens when we die, and I have gotten comfortable in that uncomfortable part of just not having all the answers and being okay with that.
Welcome to the Bounce Podcast. This is Larry Weeks. My guest today is Hadley Vlahos, or Nurse Hadley, as she is referred to across the socials. Hadley is a seasoned hospice nurse and end-of-life educator, and now to include New York Times bestselling author. Hadley is all over the interwebs, where she candidly shares her touching moments and lessons from her hospice journey, which was also the launching pad for her bestseller titled The In-Between: Unforgettable Encounters During Life's Final Moments. Her book captures profound stories from her time with patients of what end-of-life care teaches us about not only the nature of mortality, but the essence of living in the shadow of that mortality. Hadley is also spearheading an initiative to set up a nonprofit respite hospice house, a planned sanctuary to offer families a serene setting to honor and commemorate their loved ones. Now, let me tee up what you're about to hear. First, let me say that this is a very life-affirming podcast, even though the subject matter is death. Nothing morose here, I promise. And as it relates to challenge, which this pod is loosely themed, there is an aphorism I picked up over the years that I sometimes apply to product development, and that is build for the extremes and the middle takes care of itself. So, as it relates to challenge, there is nothing more extreme than facing death, whether with those close to us or our own mortality. And in life, most of our days are filled with mostly smaller, more mundane challenges. But by confronting and preparing for the inevitability of death, we can develop perspectives and strengths that aid us with the more common but stressful problems. What once seemed insurmountable can appear almost trivial in the face of it. Now, also, as it relates to real-world needs, I, as have many of you, had to avail myself of hospice twice for my family. So part of the conversation here is some practical how-to help when you ever need it. So inform yourself now when your emotions are not scrambling your brain because of grief. Hadley gives some really great advice regarding hospice toward the later part of the interview. And one of the things I love about the podcast is now I have this catalog of helpful information in audio form I can offer people when they face certain situations. And I've done that many, many times. And finally, a short note about some of the stories that Hadley shares. Hadley recounts many instances where individuals under her care report seeing their deceased loved ones, especially as they near their own time of passing. So for some of you, there will be a running conversation in your head, like I had, about their metaphysical implications. So we must ask, what does it mean for something to be real or true? But it's my understanding that every day the reality we perceive is technically a construct of our brain in this sense. The world we see is an interpretation based on the incoming sensory input and the brain's ensuing predictions. And really, there's only a subtle distinction between our inner dreamscape and the outer world. What we witness, whether it's our light-infused waking state or the projections of our dreams, all of it comes from the same spot, same place, our minds. So what I'm saying here is that the appearance of deceased loved ones can be considered true in the same sense. These experiences could be as real and even more real, like a photo is to a drawing, to the experiencer as any other event in their life. And personally, if such experiences you hear Hadley recount, if they are common, I'm comforted that such a hallmark experience is a possibility at the end of my life. So on the show, we talk about those stories and those appearances. Hadley talks about her journey from hospice nurse to author. She also discusses how her hospice training developed, and she gives some insights on hospice. She talks about her first experiences with patients, which dovetails into the phenomena which sparked the book, where it's called those in-between moments, right? And we talk about the various explanations for some of the end-of-life behavior and various explanations, and I talk about what I went through with my father. And then we get into her views on the afterlife and my skepticism. And then I talk about, or I ask Hadley about the regrets of the dying, and some interesting themes emerge from what she heard. And then I ask Hadley for kind of a process map of sorts as to how and when hospice is brought into a situation. And she offers some great advice on how to choose a hospice provider and what Medicare covers and so on and so forth. So very helpful advice here. I hope you find the conversation as touching and as interesting as I did. So without further ado, here's Hadley. Hadley, thank you so much for coming on. I want to talk to you, really just have you kind of share some of your story and your experiences and kind of get your perspective on life now, looking back, and how these experiences have affected you and the impact of someone passing away in your presence. You know, you're forever changed to a degree. Would it be fair to say that you started this journey that wound up with this best-selling book when you were 19 and the experience you had with someone passing away, or, you know, your experience with death then? Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I think we're all on our own journeys. And that is really when mine started, whenever I had a friend in high school die pretty tragically in front of all of us on a football field. And before that point, I had believed in the Episcopalian religion, never questioned it. That's just how I was raised, as a fact. And then when he died, I started asking questions in church, such as why would God take my friend? He is so young, so full of life. He had all these goals in life that he wanted to accomplish. And I didn't feel like I got the answers that made sense to me. So that was really when my faith started to be shaken. But I just kept on going through life.
I had a similar experience.
Did you?
Somebody died. I had a strong faith prior to that. And I actually conducted the funeral. It was an accident. It was unexpected, right? A young guy. That kind of started a re-reflection. At the time, I talked about air being let out of a tire. It's like, what is going on? I'm sorry. I just wanted to relate to your story.
I love that. I wanted to, hear it. So after that, I ended up going off to college. And from there, I say I was free. I didn't have to go to church anymore. So I didn't. And I ended up getting pregnant at 19, obviously unplanned, unmarried. So I ended up having my son, and writing was my original career choice when I was going into college. But it became very clear that that was not going to cut it as a single mom at 20 now. So I started looking into options that would provide for us within a reasonable time frame, and nursing fit the bill. And within a couple of years, I could make good money and always have a job, is what they say. So I went through nursing school as a single mom. And out of nursing school, I started in a hospital. I did an immediate care, a nursing home, and nothing was really fitting. I just wasn't finding my place. I wasn't loving it. It was just a job for me. And then in the nursing home, I got to see taking care of hospice patients for the first time. And I got to see the hospice nurses come in and care for our patients in the nursing home. And I realized that that might be something that I like. And I'm just like trying to find my place. And so I took a job in hospice, and it's been 6 years, and my life has completely changed. And I didn't even understand at the time how much it needed to change. I didn't understand the potential of how much these patients would impact my life and change it to where I really am happy to wake up every morning and I'm not scared of death.
So give me the bridge. So you were a nurse,
Mhm.
and then you said you helped in a nursing home. Did you have some affinity to the elderly
So
or
actually, when I was working at an immediate care, I was just offered a position as a manager. I did pretty good as a nurse. I didn't particularly love my job, but they offered me a management role in the
Mm.
affiliated nursing home. And from there, what I really liked about hospice, from what I saw, was that you're one on one with your patients. And I always felt overwhelmed with having so many patients at once, where I was just doing task to task to give this medication, to change this wound, to you can't breathe and you can't get to know anyone. And I would watch these hospice nurses come in and sit one on one with the patient. And there's nothing else that matters during that hour than that patient and whatever they want to tell you and whatever story they want to share. And that's actually what drew me to it.
okay, a change of pace from the kind of assembly line,
Yes,
as many as
exactly.
possible, to this one-on-one? Was it or wasn't it necessarily that they were dying? It was just this more personalized care. Don't let
Correct.
me.
Because
Okay,
you
got it.
really do deal with dying in pretty much every setting
You were dealing
as a
with
nurse.
it. Yeah.
It's pretty hard to avoid
Yeah.
it.
So what happened then? Because there was an interview with the New York Times about your journey here. Did you start having experiences or meeting some interesting people, and now that you're doing the hospice, and start writing or blogging or tweeting? Tell me that part.
So I'm so lucky that an older hospice nurse really took me under her wing. And she did tell me very early on, you need to start writing down these experiences. You think you'll remember them forever, but you will forget. Start writing them down.
But this is just for the job and for you personally.
Yes.
She's okay. She's not saying,
Yes.
yeah, you want to get
She's
popular.
not
So
saying to write a
okay,
book. She
right,
just says you're going to want to remember them.
got
You
it.
think your memory is better than it is, but
Yep.
start writing them down. So I did start doing that initially. I did not get on social media until 3 years into my career as a hospice nurse.
So you've
And
collected a bunch of stories
yeah,
at
I had
this
already
point.
had a
Okay.
ton, and I was just holding them in me. And I remember one day sitting in my driveway, because I always take a few minutes between leaving my job and going inside to really reflect on the day and make sure that I'm ready to go in and move into mom mode. And I remember sitting there one day before getting on social media and thinking to myself, I have all of this wonderful wisdom from all of these people who are now gone. Never get to hear from them again. They have shared all this amazing wisdom and had all these wonderful experiences that I have gotten to be a witness to. And I feel kind of selfish for just keeping them to myself. And from there, I had what I call like an accidentally viral video. Don't know how accidentally you can get when you're posting publicly, but it was my first video I ever made on TikTok, went viral. And it was just talking about the pandemic and how we said that we would care for people. My husband's also in the medical field as a physical therapist. And we just said, you know what, this wasn't in our plan, but we're going to care for you. We promised to. And that went viral. And then from there, people started asking me what kind of nurse I was. And I said, I'm a hospice nurse. And I think I have cool stories. I know a lot of people don't like hearing about death, but does anyone want to hear them? And a lot of people did. And that's really what set me off onto this trajectory of sharing all of my patients' stories. And then that evolved into a book.
Does a publisher get wind of a viral thread or something, and then is that something that comes to you, or do you package it up
So
and pitch it? Yeah.
sometimes it does. For me, it did not. I was
Mhm.
going to self publish, just write my book and put it on Amazon. I feel like it's another one of those stars aligning. Someone who followed me, I didn't have as many followers at that point as I do now, maybe 40,000. She worked in publishing and she reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to actually be in bookstores? And I said, yeah, but I don't think, like, I live in a small town in the South. Like, that's for people who live in New York. Like, I can't do that. She was like, I'll walk you through the process. And she volunteered her time. And she was like, I think that this could be really big thing. And so she walked me through the process. I had to get a literary agent. We had to submit a book proposal. It was quite a journey. And it took 2.5 years from that to being published.
So back to your kind of experience with patients in hospice, and I'm sure this is probably prior to hospice, but do you remember the first time a patient died in your care?
Yes.
What was that like for you? And had you, prior to your teenage self, had any kind of experience like that?
So I had patients die in front of me when I worked in the hospital, especially where it was traumatic. It was not like a hospice situation. It was, we were trying to do CPR, we were trying to get them back, and we just couldn't, which is very different from what I experience all the time as a hospice nurse. So my first in-home death where I was there, it's chapter 1 in my book for anyone listening who hasn't read it. Her death was very peaceful. Her daughter was there, and she had seen her deceased sister beforehand. And I was very concerned. I was like, is she hallucinating? Like, do we need to medicate her? And everyone around me that worked in hospice said, no, she's fine. She's calm. She's at peace. We believe that she's actually seeing her deceased sister, and she's coming to help her cross over. And whenever she died, it was extremely peaceful.
How old was this patient?
She was in her 70s.
Okay. And how long were you with her in the
Not
hospital?
very long.
Okay.
I had only seen her for a couple of days because I was training, and I was assigned to a nurse to train under, but this patient was seeing deceased loved ones. So my manager called me over and was like, I want you to experience this and see this.
Who was saying what you said, saying, no, we believe she's seeing her sister? Who was saying that around the family?
So no, the family didn't believe it at all, actually. It was my manager, my coworkers, the doctor. And I was like, what in the world are these people? This is very different type of medicine that y'all actually think. But at the same time, she was calm and she was at peace and she did not need to be medicated.
Is this unusual for hospice patients? Is this a norm of sorts?
It is
And
definitely normal.
in your training in hospice, do they say patients are going to see things, hear things that you are not? This is to be expected, I'm assuming.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So you expected it. I'm assuming you weren't surprised, or why does this stand out for you?
So I did not expect it. A lot of the training in hospice is on the job training. So that was just my first experience with it. And I thought it was just a hallucination. So
I'm sorry. In the training, they don't tell you to expect these type of things.
Yeah, you just kind of learn it, and then they're like, oh yeah, that's normal.
Oh, okay. Oh, got it. Sorry. Go ahead. So you weren't expecting it.
No, I was not expecting it. And whenever it happened, I thought she was hallucinating. So I asked my manager who was there, what medications do we give her? Because that's what you do in any other setting. You give medications when someone's hallucinating. And she said, we're not. And I was like, what in the world? She said, we're just need to make sure she's okay, that she's calm, she's at peace, she's comfortable. And I was like, okay. And she was right. And I've experienced it hundreds of times since then.
So she's eyes closed and talking, eyes open and talking?
Yeah, eyes open and talking. And she talks just like you and I do to her sister. And then she'll talk to me. So just like there's two people in the room that you're talking to, and I can't see one of them. And that's what they all do.
All right. So what was your thinking the first time that happened? Well, that's interesting. Did you believe her the first time that happened?
Yeah, I thought everyone was crazy the first time.
Right.
I thought everyone around me was crazy.
So it sounds like now, and based on your book, that you believe that she is seeing her sister. And how many times did that happen for you to, change what you thought of it?
I had a couple of patients after her. Carl and Sue are their names, where I had them for a very long time. I started taking my own patients, and I had them 6 months to 8 months. So I got to know them extremely well.
That's rare, right? For hospice, is it rare, 6 to 8 months?
I'd say it's about 10% of people will be on it for 6 months. The average is about a month, I believe, 3 weeks. So it is rare. So I had those two that were my first patients where I really had a really good relationship with them. And I got to know them very, very well. And I trusted them, of course. So Carl died first, and he had his deceased daughter, who drowned when she was 2, come to get him. And he told me about that while also talking to me. And that was very profound for me. But at the same time, I still had in the back of my mind just that question of, is this just something that our brain does at the end of life? And then with Sue, who I was extremely, extremely, extremely close to, there was one point where I knew that she was getting close to dying, and I was just not handling it well. And I was in my car just saying to myself, like, how are you supposed to be a hospice nurse if you dread your patients' deaths? You knew this was going to happen. The second that you walked into that home, you knew that this was coming. How could you? Maybe this job is not
How
for you.
long did you spend with Sue?
It was 6 months with her.
6 months. Go ahead. Sorry.
And so I just saying, maybe you're not cut out for this role. You can't dread your patient's death like this. And so when she was getting close to dying, I told her family and her, please call me even if I am not the on-call nurse. I want to be there for y'all. I don't want another nurse to be doing the death visit when she dies. I want to be the one that's there for her. And the day before she died, her husband came and got her, who had been dead for a very long time. He died in the war, World War II. She was suddenly at peace and calm and happy. And I knew that she was going to die soon because of that. But I didn't know when. It can be anywhere from a couple of hours to maybe 3 days once that happens.
Once what happens? Sorry.
Once you're seeing deceased loved ones or you're having other end-of-life symptoms such as breathing changes, blood pressure changes. So
okay.
I went home that night. I reminded everyone, make sure you call me. I told all my coworkers, call me if it's her. I will be there. And I went home that night wondering if the call would come at any second. Of course, was checking my phone throughout the night. The morning came. I didn't get a call. And I had a feeling that she might die that night. So I called her son right at 8 a.m. to check on them and see how the night went. And he told me that she had died that night. And of course, I start apologizing profusely, saying, I am so sorry. I thought I told everyone you're supposed to call me. I wanted to be there for y'all. And he said, well, Dad, which was her deceased husband, told Mom to not call you because you couldn't handle it. And for me, that was the first instance where I was like, well, that's weird because I didn't tell anyone that I was struggling with her about to be dying. And maybe this actually is something more than just hallucinations.
All right. So this is the crack in kind of your
yes
framework. So you said the husband you witnessed that piece of that happening. So she's talking to you and then she's saying,
my husband's here to come get me.
Okay. Did you have a conversation about that or?
With her?
Yes.
Whenever he was she said he's coming to get me. And at that point, I knew that she was about to fall asleep just based on how she was not keeping her eyes open much. And at the end of life, people are barely awake. You only get a couple of hours at a time. And I was more concerned with telling her bye. I was so used to that I was like, okay, she's actually dying and she's about to go to sleep. And so I just was trying to tell her more like, I'm going to miss you. Thank you for letting me care for you.
I mean, did you tip at that point? Was that it? Or did you have a couple more experiences or many more that kind of put you over the line of belief versus disbelief?
I had many more after that, but that one definitely was churning in the back of my mind for a very long time. It still does today, where you try to think of rational explanations and you don't come up with anything.
Got it. But it doesn't happen for all patients who pass on. So I was with my father. He passed away in 2018 and he was hospice, but at my brother's house. And I was with him the whole time. There was a nurse there we only had the nurse come so my brother and I could rest. He would kind of talk to himself, but I don't think I understood it. I do know that he would occasionally lift his arm up here and there. And so I had prepared a bit. I had researched that some of these things, would happen. So based on my experience, and then, my wife's father passed away, not seeing those, I'm assuming it doesn't happen to everybody. But is it, in your experience, a majority of patients that are seeing previously deceased loved ones, or is this a rarity? Sorry.
So I would say your experience is common as well. What I have seen with people reaching up in the air, which is very common, sometimes people can tell us that they are seeing deceased loved ones. So I have seen that exactly what you describe with people who can talk to us. So whenever people can't talk to us, I've kind of personally thought, and I don't always share this with families if they don't seem open to it, but I've personally made my own assumptions that maybe they are also seeing deceased loved ones, but they just can't communicate it to us anymore. So, in my opinion, I do think people always have someone come for them, but I think they either can't communicate it to us always, which sounds like what happened with your dad, or they don't. Because I've also had patients, especially older men, who will not tell their loved ones that they are seeing someone because they don't want to be perceived as crazy. And they have personally shared it with me, but they don't want people to think that they're like losing their mind or have Alzheimer's or think less than them. So whenever they see something that they know shouldn't be there, they'll sometimes tell me privately, but they'll say, please don't tell my wife or don't tell my kids. I don't want them to think that I'm crazy. So, and then sometimes, of course, I wonder if they don't tell me at all either, you know?
So just for the audience out there, you look absolutely convinced this is real, right? I have read psychedelic experiences where people have seen deceased loved ones as well. Now, that's real in the sense that they're seeing something. The people on psychedelics aren't leaving the room, right? They're not going to another dimension, coming back. So you think this is really happening from a standpoint of loved ones that are helping them pass from this world to the next. Then tell me, based on the other alternative explanations, why you are convinced. Is that a hard question? Is that?
No, not at all. I've done a ton of research into it because I wanted to know too. So I looked into the DMT studies.
I'm a skeptic, by the way. That's where I'm coming from.
I totally
I'm a skeptic. But let me say, I mean, I seem like it, but I'm open-minded, right?
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I still have that, thought process, but I did read the DMT study. So it was a very small study, first of all. I believe it was less than 30 people, and there's only been one that I know of that they gave the participants DMT. They had the control group and then the people that they gave it to. And I read through the transcript of what they saw. And some people did see deceased loved ones, but a lot of people also saw rainbows, the walls moving. They saw a bright light. And to me, that's not what I have my patients experience. It is always deceased loved ones. Some of them were fearful. I've always had them be very calm, no matter what. And then the other thing is that when they come to get them really varies, and it does not match clinically with what the hypothesis is. So the hypothesis is that when we die, this DMT is released. Whereas I'm having patients have these experiences a week before they die. So it doesn't make sense that they would have this large burst of DMT released and then live for a week and still have them come and go for a week. It doesn't even make biological sense that that would be releasing for that long. So that's where my seeds of doubt are. And what's interesting is that I think a lot of people have taken that study and tried to correlate it to hospice patients seeing deceased loved ones when that actually wasn't even the researchers' intention. They were really just trying to see what happens whenever you take DMT to the mind. And I feel like people have really cherry-picked the experiences personally and said, oh, 2 people saw deceased loved ones. That must be what happens to the millions of hospice patients who experience this every year. To me, like, correlation doesn't mean causation, but I do hope they do more studies on it. And I hope that they show that we don't even know if DMT is in our brains. We don't even know if it's produced at all. But at the same time, I'm like, even if evidence comes out to show that that is what's happening, I'm totally open to it. And in my opinion, it won't make me fearful of death, because what I see is that all of my patients, whenever their deceased loved ones come to get them, they are at peace. So if our mind at the end of our lives makes sure that we are calm and at peace and comforted, that's okay with me too. I still think that's a positive.
And that's why I wanted to have you on. And because obviously, the older you get, you're going to have more death in your life. I lost a best friend suddenly, and I've lost other loved ones slowly, cancer and what have you. So, the cards stack up and you're like, what's this all about? So I'm incredibly curious about it, but also, I'm boning up. I want to study up and be prepared for that day when it comes. So, by the way, you did mention the classical thing is a white light, right? That's been
Yeah.
out in the cultural jet stream for a very long time. That's not something
I've
you've ever. That's
no.
interesting. By the way, how many patients? What's the collective number here? Do you know that you've seen? Give me a ballpark since
I'm
you've.
going on 7 years, maybe getting close to 1,000 patients.
Okay, all right. So that's statistically significant. All right.
Yeah.
So okay.
I've had a lot of
So
patients. Yeah.
so out of that many, no white lights,
Nope,
not
never.
no tunnels. Okay.
Never.
I was on a plane once, Hadley, and I sat right next to this guy who found out had a near-death experience.
I
And
think that's so interesting.
so I'm super curious. So I'm like peppering this guy with questions, but he's actually made it his living. So after he survived, or if let's say he came back, I'll just give him the benefit of the doubt. After he came back, he wrote a book and he's this kind of an evangelist, speaking to churches, what have you. So a part of me was a little skeptical once it turned that way, where I was like, okay, this is your livelihood's dependent on this. So how are you're going to double down, right? There's going to be a cognitive bias here. The problem and, the curiosity about this is that these things are personal. You can't put an experience under a microscope in the sense of, or you can't give somebody a blood test for that. I guess you give them a lie detector, but I'm not sure that'll do any good. So a lot of family members, and you think even more than what is expressed, because sometimes maybe they don't want to express it.
Mhm.
And I can see my dad being that way. I can see my
Really?
dad,
Yeah.
but any other outside of white lights or family members coming, is there another common occurrence? And by the way, I want to put a stake in the ground. You said when somebody mentions a family member coming, you're saying it's not too soon after that, they're probably going to pass. Is that
Yes.
right? Now,
Yes.
being too soon means maybe within a week.
Yes.
Okay.
Generally
All right.
speaking, yes.
But any other
Experiences?
experiences? Yeah, I'm just going
Yeah,
to use
a
that.
couple others that we can't explain through science other than seeing deceased loved ones is the surge of energy. So, not everyone gets this, but the people who do, sometimes it can be extremely profound. And basically, in my book, Carl, when he saw his deceased daughter, he had been bedbound. He hadn't gotten out of bed the entire time I knew him. I don't know how much before that. He was out of his bed walking around. So they call that the surge of energy, where they will perk up. And sometimes that can be very small. It just might mean someone wants to come into the living room and eat ice cream or their favorite meal and talk with people when they've been pretty quiet in their room for many months. And they will have this little surge of energy that we also can't explain. And then they decline very quickly after that. Hard because family members think that they're getting better.
The story of Carl got me choked up. This is where he got out of the bed and he was playing hide and seek with his
daughter,
with his 2-year-old daughter, but she drowned years prior, and he felt some guilt over that. Wow. So you were there. He's having this experience.
Yes.
Are you just like stoic, or are you
No.
rock? Yeah. No,
That one at that time, I was still like, what in the world? Because I had seen the surge of energy, but not that much to where someone could get out of bed all of a sudden.
And he's telling you, I'm playing hide and seek.
Hide and seek with Anna was her name.
Wow.
Yeah.
That got to me. Wow. I mean, that's beautiful. I don't want to pigeonhole you into one thing, because I'm sure there's so many, and I want to get into kind of the regrets of the dying kind of a thing here. But is the main biggest takeaway you have here is this shift that you had from skepticism to confidence that people do pass from this world to the next, and there is something after this life. Okay.
I completely believe that, but it is also just the way that my life has transformed through these patients, and I've really learned how to live now and have a better life right now.
How so?
the way I get this advice is I'm one of the youngest always. No matter where I work, I'm always one of my youngest amongst my coworkers. Most hospice nurses are a little bit older. And so if patients seem up to it, I'll always ask them, what advice would you give to yourself when you were my age? And they'll sometimes talk me through it. And I've learned a lot from that. And it's not always what you would think. A lot of people have said that they wish they wouldn't have focused so much on material things. And when I would hear that at first, I thought that meant like you don't need anything. Like throw out all the paintings, you don't walk everywhere, you don't need anything. And I've come to understand through talking to so many people that it's more about not buying stuff to impress other people. But if, say, you love a home and it won't cause you to work a bunch of overtime hours, you can comfortably afford it. And it would make you so happy to come home to that home every day and raise your kids in it. They would encourage you to buy that because it brings you daily happiness that comes from yourself and not buying a mansion just so that you can throw a holiday party every year and impress all of your friends. And then you have to work 80 hours a week. So it's that line. So they aren't actually saying don't own anything. Material things don't matter at all. It's just more about your internal happiness, which I think has been really important.
Yeah, I think you have a story of, is it Elizabeth? She was a terminal cancer patient. And she told you she regretted spending too much time worrying about her weight. Is that right?
She did, which is something I've struggled with. So she said that she wished she would have eaten the cake, that she had avoided hanging out with her friends because going to the beach, she didn't want people to see the way her stomach looked. So she wouldn't go to the beach, or she wouldn't go out to dinners because she was obsessively counting all of her calories. And she died younger, 40s. And it was a cancer of, they have no idea. She was the picture of health. She was a yoga instructor. And she had lung cancer of an unknown cause. She had never smoked a day in her life. And she just lost her life way too young. And she just said, I didn't think that my time would end anytime soon. And now looking back, I really just wish I would have spent more time with my friends and my family.
So that sounds like a theme, because you mentioned it prior, that it's not so much money and material things so much as what you're trying to do with that, whether it be impress others or keep up with the Joneses or what have you. You did touch on it briefly, but a big part of what you read about deathbed stories or regrets is, I wish I didn't spend so much time in the office. I wish I had more fun or played or what have you. That's sort of a cliche now. I mean, and it makes sense, right? It makes intuitive. But is that something that did come up?
Yes, I've definitely heard often that they didn't realize how quickly the baby years would go, and I had babies, so I definitely think about that often. And then I think the focus really is on the unfulfilling work, taking that job that you don't really like because it makes you a lot of money, or
You heard
working.
this. You heard
Yes,
this.
yes. But I've also had patients I've taken care of that have done work that they love, and they don't regret working as much as they did. They loved climbing the corporate ladder. And so I think it's very personal. But as long as you love what you do, then I think it's okay for you to spend your time that way.
That seems to be the takeaway, right? It's not so much.
Yeah.
And I just read this and it makes sense. It's like work is 8 hours or more of your day. So, but if you like it, well, you're having 8 hours of enjoyment or some kind of accomplishment. So I get that. Is there anything that's an outlier that it's not so intuitive of what would somebody say on their deathbed?
Yeah, one was super profound for me. He was a lawyer and he spent his whole life in law, and he was very successful, I believe, by anyone's take. And he told me that 1 year into being a lawyer, he knew that he didn't want to be a lawyer and he wanted to quit. And he went to all of his family and friends and said, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. And they all said, well, what do you mean? You just spent all this time in school. What do you mean you don't want to be a lawyer? You just graduated a year ago. And so he stuck with it. And he told me that at that time, he should have just stopped. I mean, yes, it was 8 years total of his life. He said, but it doesn't matter. It's in the past. And I could have changed careers right then, but I spent 50 years as a lawyer and I hated being a lawyer. Whereas in comparison, that was nothing at the time, 1 year.
So before hospice and these experiences, you had your personality, whatever that is. So before hospice, you reacted based on whatever, and after now you react. Are those reactions to things different? And what I'm getting at is being this close to death, you
Mhm.
being so familiar with death, I mean, I'll use the word intimate even, right?
Mhm.
You're there with so many people at this point of, let's say, passing on. You can't help but get mad and get frustrated. You're just human. But do things bother you less?
I think so. I really have a mindset of we never know when it's going to be our time. And I know that I'll be in their shoes one day. So every single day, I'm thinking, how am I going to make myself proud whenever I'm in those shoes? Like when I'm looking back on this day, however many years later, hopefully many years, am I going to say that I was doing my best? Was I treating others well? Was I putting good into the world? Were people leaving conversations happier than when they came into them? And that's what's really important to me.
And that's what I want to get at is what would you tell me if you were to create a syllabus for me to get ready for death? And you just told me, right? I'm assuming that's it. But is there anything else? Because I've been with people when they died and I've thought about death. I had a best friend my age, boom, he just, I saw him one weekend, we got together. We actually talked about what was important in life. We had those kind of conversations. And then a day later, he drops dead. Now, that impacts me from a grief standpoint, but I don't know what I'm learning so much as life is short, it's fragile, but I don't know what to do with that because Hadley, I can't say, okay, I could be dead next year. So I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to stop
Right.
doing that. I'm just going to travel the world. That's not practical. I'm not sure what to do with this thing that's waiting for me. So this may be a tough question, but I think you started to tell me how you're living with it and how it's affecting
Mhm.
you.
I think what I've really learned through many different people is, like you said, that's what a lot of people think. I should just quit my job and go travel the world. But in reality, what I've learned is that a life is not made up of what happens every now and then, it's made up of every day. And so instead of going on one big trip a year and connecting with your spouse, then, so to say, it's more important to have 30 minutes of uninterrupted time every single day than going on one trip. It's these small little daily things that you do, whether that be making your favorite meal on a Monday or taking this scenic route to work or just these very small things that you build into that every single day of your life is happy, it matters more.
Because I try to do the thought experiment of, hey, imagine you're on your deathbed. And I've seen the deathbed. I've seen my father's, I've seen others. And then it's like, what are you going to regret? It's not easy for me. I'm not afraid, I don't think, but it's just hard to project into my future self at that time. A lot of times I'm not sure what makes me happy until after the fact. So let's talk about hospice and I was trying to piece together Hadley my experience. I think this is what happened is that my father was in the hospital and spending a lot of time in the hospital. And then it got to the point where the doctor realized this, he's not going to improve. This is it. And then we had this very serious conversation where he said, hey, Larry, you might want to consider hospice. So it was a doctor
Mhm.
recommendation to me. I'm assuming that 9 times out of 10, that's how that happens.
Yes.
And then they say, here's some hospice providers to call.
Mhm.
Well, what about, because I have had the experience on the other side of that where a doctor wasn't involved. I actually came in and said, hey, I recommend you guys calling hospice care, what have you. So is that how it usually happens or somebody just makes the decision on their own?
I'd say, like you said, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be like a hospital situation or home health with therapy, physical therapy, saying maybe it's time for hospice because I see it. It is very rare, I'd say, for a self referral is what that's called, where the family or the patient calls. I think it should be a lot more common. It would save that hospital trip that usually is what causes them to go into hospice. If they would have called a week beforehand, we could have been the ones to come instead of the what can be sometimes traumatic hospital stay. So I think it should happen more, but it's pretty rare.
So let's lay out the options. What are the options?
Actually, you can call the hospice, whatever hospice company you want to use,
Okay.
and say they will call your doctor, whoever that is, and discuss it with them, request notes, and then a nurse will go out and see if you're eligible, and we discuss it with our hospice physician. And then, yeah, if you're eligible, you can get signed up.
Okay. And what does hospice offer? Palliative care, medications. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So as long as you're over 65, you really don't need to worry. Medicare covers hospice 100%. We will cover medications, especially comfort medications. There's a registered nurse that's assigned to you called a case manager who will just make sure everything goes smoothly. And then we have nurses on call 24/7, a physician on call 24/7. We have social workers that come visit you, chaplains if you want to pray, or if you're not religious, spiritual, just want comfort or even someone to talk to. Our chaplains go see atheist patients, just talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then nurses aides, so they can come give a bath, help get you changed, and they'll come a couple times a week.
So my hospice care nurse, she would come a couple times during the day or once or twice, or once during the day. And how's he doing? Blah, blah, blah. But then it was very helpful at night. She would come and stay up with him while my brother and I slept for a few hours. I'm assuming that's just something you asked for, or can you, or they offer, or I don't remember how we got there with my father.
So we have volunteers who can do that. And then we'll do that on like a case by case basis. If someone needs some sleep is usually how it works, more of like a short term.
And he was very, it was very
short. Yeah. We can bill Medicare for it if it's just, this is a couple of times, but otherwise, so people know, paid caregivers are also an option if it's going to be like weeks or months where you're needing 6 hours or more per day.
How does one choose a hospice provider?
That is such a good question. I've never had anyone ask me that, and I have such strong opinions on it. So I would say family or friend recommendations is number one. If you have a family or friend who had someone on hospice and they liked the experience, I think that is the number one indicator that you should go for.
Because I want to say, I've had two very different experiences. One bad, one good. Okay.
Right. I believe it. I'd say that's pretty normal. You would recommend the good ones. You know how it is. From there, if you don't have family or friends to recommend, I would ask your doctor if you trust them, because we have to work with our doctors often. But don't use that only because they're only getting phone calls. They're not actually seeing what it's like in the home. I would then go on Indeed and search the company that you're considering and see how many job openings they have to see how short-staffed they are. So if they have, say, one nurse opening, fine. That's normal. If they're saying we are hiring all shifts, we need this nurse, we need that nurse, I would avoid them.
Because whoever shows up is going to be rushed as hell or burn out. That is very good advice. That's interesting.
And I think that's a good place to start. And then another one is to ask them their caseload, which means how many patients they have. So like my company has I think 50 right now. And then ask them how many nurses they have. And then you can kind of divide how many patients they're each going to have. A good company will do 10 to 15 patients for each nurse. I have been at companies where they have given me 22 patients. That is too many. You cannot effectively manage 22 dying patients. So my current company averages 12. I think that's wonderful. So, and then just, do the math.
Wow. That's great advice. Let's just circle back to a lot of what we talked about as far as the afterlife. So tell me, what do you think happens to us after we die? Tell me where you are with that. Do you think the consciousness just lives on in some collective or?
Yeah, I do. And, that's part of the reason for the title, the in-between, the main reason is that I am with patients in the in-between this world and whatever comes next whenever I'm with them at the end. But a big reason for it is that when I was raised, I had this very black and white thinking of there's either a God in religion or there's nothing. Nothing happens. And the in-between symbolizes where I sit now, which is just that I'm spiritual and I have no issue with any religion at all. I think that at the heart of them, they're trying to teach people to be a good person. And I think that's wonderful. But personally, for me, I just feel like something happens when we die. And I have gotten comfortable in that uncomfortable part of just not having all the answers and being okay with that.
Did this remove your fear of death, these experiences? Or
Yes.
did you have one?
I was very scared of death. Yes, and I'm not scared of death anymore at all.
What would you say to those who still are afraid of death?
I think the biggest thing would be to look into things, not just my book, but studies of near-death experiences. What I find is that people who are at the most peace at the end of life are at peace with what they believe, no matter what that is, whether they are an atheist or agnostic or super religious or just spiritual. Whenever they have found peace in what they believe, that is when they're the least scared of it.
And maybe there's, and you tell me, but there also may be just a simple principle that the more you avoid something that you fear, the more afraid you're going to be, versus being curious, investigating, leaning in.
I totally agree. Yes. And I am so about that. I'm part of all these snake Facebook groups so that they'll pop up on my thing and I can learn about them and what's
that's interesting.
Scared of snakes. And it's been helping.
Yeah.
Learning that really like 90% of snakes are not venomous. They're not going to hurt me whenever I had in my mind that I'm going to die if I see a snake. And it does. It helps.
Is there any books that you would recommend outside of yours that you found very helpful or very interesting around this whole topic?
Yes. Final Gifts is one. I believe it was self-published by 2 hospice nurses many years ago. It's amazing. Another one is Signs by Laura Lynn Jackson. That is a medium, but it's not what you think it is. She gives more practical advice for if you think that you are getting signs from loved ones, how to interpret them. And she says you don't need a medium. I like it just because I think that I get signs. So if you're more on that spectrum, you'll like her book too.
Hadley, where could people reach out to you, contact you, find you, or any of your writings? And the book is Amazon everywhere, right?
Yes, the book is everywhere you buy books. It's called The In-Between: Unforgettable Encounters During Life's Final Moments. I'm Hadley Vlahos. And then my social handles are Nurse Hadley everywhere and nursehadley.com.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy. And the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit larryweeks.com, and we will talk again soon.